Looks like the killer gutted the victim, strangled him with his own intestines, and then dumped the body in the river. We're dealing with one sick son of a bitch.
You wanted me home to see a TV cartoon show?
Finally back to Spider-Man Cartoons Retrospective Part 2. Hopefully you guys don't mind the wait, but you know, it's only been, wait, 7 months? Oh shit! Well, I've kind of put off doing this video because of all the Spider-Man cartoons out there, these two are the ones that I had the least to say about. They're not shows I'm particularly passionate about due to any emotional connection with them, nor are they misunderstood little time capsules like the 60s series that I'd show in a new light. They're both exactly what you think they are at first glance. A Spider-Man show and... gee, we need to sell more action figures, let's give him some sidekicks! But before I dig too deep into that topic, I want to thank some amazing friends who have backed me up by sponsoring this video. Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives where millions come together to take the next step in their creative journey. Skillshare offers thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people on topics including illustration, design, photography, video, freelancing, and more. These classes include a combination of video lessons and class projects. These classes are designed to give you the real-world skills that can help you with pursuing your passions, with lessons in animation, film, illustration, and graphic design, web development, and plenty of others. I'm most interested in exploring that creative storytelling class hosted by Daniel Jose Older. It's incredibly affordable at less than $10 a month for an annual subscription and is always launching new premium classes. At a time when so many important conversations are happening in our world, your voice is more essential than ever. Explore classes to unlock your creativity for social good. The first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. So what are you waiting for? Join today! I will say it's a little interesting and strange to me how the 1981 show is often very looked over by fans of the character. It's not quite the infamous meme machine of the turbulent decade, swathed in laughable decisions and lovably absurd animation. And it's not quite the nostalgic journey through your childhood that millennials tend to attribute to Two Guys, One Firestar or the Punchless Wonder over here. Fun fact, that's probably the only joke I'm going to make about that because I feel like it's the most tired talking point ever, and there's so much more to talk about with this series than just the censorship. See, there I go! I'm more interested in talking about that guy than these guys. I still feel as though it's tradition to at least try to do a full episode on a particular subject, so I'll still give an honest attempt at looking back at these two unloved middle children of the televised Dead Uncle broadcasts. So, 80s Spider-Man. They had enough money to draw the webs this time. I jest, but I actually really dig the look of this show. It's pretty clearly inspired by John Romita Jr.'s artwork from the 80s and reminds me a lot of his comics from that time. Back in the good old days when every artist was instructed to keep it all on model and every Spidey comic looked like Romita Sr., so it wasn't distracting when the book changed art teams. In a weird way, I kinda like how consistent things were in those days. Before Todd McFarlane came in and said, just draw whatever, give him 10 million webs and put his thighs behind his head, everyone go nuts! So this show's visual style feels like a sign of the times, and I appreciate these character designs. They're simple enough to animate, but more accurate than the series' predecessor. And speaking of accuracy, this show has a pretty strong grasp on its title character that should be given more praise. Spider-Man stays out all night fighting crime, but then falls asleep and forgets to do his homework. That's on brand, I dig it. Spidey has to ditch his date early to go catch a villain and then gets dumped in the most embarrassing way possible.
JJ, what do you say you and I have a night on the town?
Sure, why not? Don't work too hard, Parker!
Who says the good guy always gets the girl?
Yeah, that tracks. He forgets to lock the door on his closet and has to figure out a way to explain the Spider-Man costume in there to his Aunt May. Nailed it. I like how this show captures those little human conflicts that go on in his day-to-day life. Those silly little things that ground him and make him more relatable than your average costumed crusader. I can tell you Batman doesn't give two shits what his date thinks. He's more interested in all the sexual tension he's got going on with that rambunctious Skywalker juggalo. Iron Man doesn't do homework, he just drinks and f***s and then causes one more day to happen. You ever seen Captain America have to go to the DMV to get his plates renewed? No siree. But anyway, every episode has a nice little example of Peter's home life and his superhero life being at odds. And one of the dramatic strengths of the character is how when Peter Parker succeeds, typically Spider-Man loses, and vice versa. This cartoon has a better grasp on this character than 95% of his Twitter fandom who keep arguing about whether or not he's a pessimist or an optimist, or whether he wants Iron Man to be his dad or he wants to punch him. Here's one of my favorite moments from the show where it just felt like pure unadulterated Spider-Man brought to life. Well, 2D life, drawn on cells. And the Sandman accidentally tears off Spidey's mask in a fight, and he has to scramble away like a punk to figure out how to conceal his face again before going after him. This is a cool setup, and I gotta give props to the animators for working in a scenario where Peter's face is visible during an action scene. It's probably not as cheap or easy to animate his facial expressions during a fast and energetic scene like this, but they went the extra mile that the 60s show wouldn't have touched with a 10-foot pole, which would have been poorly inserted into one of the 6 pre-rendered shots that you've seen 5 or 6 times already in the last 22 minutes. Then there's some great moments with J. Jonah Jameson bantering back and forth with the trapped Spidey.
Hey, neighbor. I wonder if you could spare a helping hand.
You don't fool me, you web slinger. Whatever you're up to, I'm gonna get it on film.
Oh, great. You can pass out snapshots at my funeral.
And a cool ending where our hero uses both personas to get a personal victory for himself. There's plenty of cool episodes in this show that feel very worthy of the character, if you can stomach a few that shove in some villains that were just popular at the time. Both Magneto and Dr. Doom appear in this show, with Doom having a very disproportionate amount of screen time for whatever reason. In fact, I think Doom is the main villain in the intro. He appears more times in that opening credits than even Green Goblin, damn. There are 4 different episodes with him as the main villain, while Vulture, Goblin, Sandman, Lizard, Chameleon, and Kraven all just get 1. The villain roster is also padded out with a few original characters too. I understood why that happened in the 60s cartoon, but at this point there had been 20 years worth of new villains to choose from, so there wasn't really much of an excuse to not use them. However, something kind of cool about this show is that not every episode has an origin for their villains. And this show implies that Spidey's been around for a while and seems to know who some of these chumps are. And unlike the 60s cartoon, this one definitely had a better grasp of how to use Green Goblin, and adapts a classic Spidey story with Norman Osborn recovering from amnesia and remembering Spidey's identity after a battle a few years ago caused him to forget.
Perfect. Just in time to find Spider-Man without his mask. And think what the shock will do to your dear old Aunt May!
That's even Neil Ross, the same Green Goblin voice actor from the 90s show. But what of Spidey's trademark girl problems? Who does he pine for in this show? Well, Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane aren't here, but Betty Brant is? Okay. And much like the 60s cartoon, I wish that wasn't the case. Betty just gets angry at him constantly, complains, and says he's a shitty boyfriend, but then keeps going out with him anyway. If the guy was such a flake, then stop messing with him and get with a real man like Flash Thompson. He's Venom sometimes. But then Peter comes to his senses and decides to get with someone who understands him. Medusa from the Inhumans. I'm not joking, that's how the show ends. He saves Medusa from being controlled by a villain, and then they hook up.
Love? Hey, who would I be in love with?
Not the redhead you were expecting, but I'll take it. When this series goes for direct Spidey stories, it does a pretty solid job of adapting them and really captures the zany cheesiness of his comics from that time, as well as how in those stories Spidey and his villains usually take this goofy stuff deadly serious. And even when it's trying to tell an original story, it does an okay job of making that fit the tone and themes of Spider-Man anyway. And even sometimes has some superhero crossovers, which were a new thing in superhero cartoons at the time. It has a bit of a problem prioritizing which villains to use, but it has a decent take on all the classics. I like this one a lot. I'd say this is the first really great attempt at a Spidey cartoon after the 60s show started to lose the plot a little due to budgetary concerns. If you like good old John Spider-Man and his chaotic day-to-day life, check it out.
But you could come with me.
This is where I belong.
Then farewell.
You'll never escape again, murderer!
I'm down to my last Spidey suit. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
Have you ever wanted a show where Spider-Man replicates what was most popular in that era of cartoons? Groups of hip young platonic teens going on adventures with a silly cartoon dog sidekick. Well, if you did, then look what you did, you monster! In fact, Iceman looks and sounds just like Fred Jones.
I don't believe this! Ms. Lion!
though the dog might be more of an attempt to ape off of Super Friends. In this show, Spidey teams up with his GBF and will they won't they gal pal, Coriander of Tamaran. The three of them have powers based on the 4 elements: fire, ice, and spiders.
You're gonna get a big charge out of this.
Of all the people in the Marvel Universe to saddle Spidey with as permanent sidekicks, I feel like Iceman was a really random choice. And then making an original character was even more confusing. Apparently they couldn't get the Human Torch due to some licensing issues, which is why he was replaced with a dumbass robot in that other cartoon. So Angelica Jones was created and looks way too much like Mary Jane. The three of them sleep in the same bedroom in Aunt May's house, which she's now renting out as a polyamory-friendly bed and breakfast. I appreciate how Fireman and Ice Star aren't super intrusive. This still feels like a Spider-Man show through and through. They aren't posited as Spidey's equals and shoved into his spotlight. They know their place. Title should have been Spider-Man and his subservient bottoms. So I bet you're wondering, this looks a lot like the 1981 series. Is this a sequel to that? Well, that's kind of confusing and hard to answer, especially considering both shows started airing on the same day. Spider-Man was popular back then, I guess.
Whatever turns you on turns me on too, Spidey darling.
So, Spider-Man's voice is different. Now he's voiced by original Bumblebee voice actor Dan Gilvezan. You whippersnappers may also recognize him as Spider-Man 2099 in Shattered Dimensions. Well, sometimes it seems like the shows are connected. Spider-Friends has a flashback to the Magneto episode of the 80s cartoon, but both of them portray Green Goblin very differently, with one going the split personality costume change route, and the other making it seem like he's not wearing a costume. He just actually physically turns green and crazy. Both shows cover the origin in different ways. There's also a lot of continuity errors with what's going on with Red Skull and Doom. So my prognosis is no, these shows are not connected. They just share some footage in one spot where it could save them some money. And, you know, use similar music and character designs. But outside of that, they are happening in different timelines. And that really shows in the tone of both shows.
A swim is just what I need to revive my strength. Ah! Dang it! That's not water, it's alcohol!
This show is the true spiritual successor to the 60s cartoon, in that it recreates the signature style of having 2 episode types. Decent adaptations of comic storylines, and bizarre batshit insane buffoonery where Spider-Man feels out of place because everything around him is so strange. Like an episode where they adapt the first appearance of Green Goblin. You know, that weird storyline where he tricks Spider-Man into starring in a fake movie about himself for money as a trap, then tries to murder him, then the Hulk randomly shows up because they were in a cave he was staying in at the time. Except the show did that better because they swapped out Goblin with Mysterio, who is a villain already associated with deception in Hollywood, so it works way better. Good on ya, you retroactively fixed a really stupid story that even Deadpool thought was a weird intro for Spidey's nemesis. Then there's the other type of episodes, where everyone is bugs and Spidey has bug eyes over his costume bug eyes, and in an episode where he dates an alien girl, and an episode where Electro traps Flash Thompson in a video game, and an episode where Iceman comes out to his parents, and an episode where Firestar marries Dracula. More often than not, in both types of episodes, the villain is always watching our heroes and torturing them from a control room full of monitors. I like to think in the Marvel Universe, there's some company out there selling supercomputers and various monitors whose sole customer base is supervillains trying to kill the Spider-Friends. You can tell which episodes I'm more of a fan of. The weird random stuff doesn't do it for me, but there are a handful of original episode storylines that aren't terrible and feel a bit more grounded.
Wait! No!
See you back at the gym. Boy, that student really rigged up the wires. Wires?
And even if not every episode hits for me, I do like the look of this show a lot. Same cool character designs, but occasionally some pretty detailed shading, and it even slips into like an 80s anime style. I suspect because a few portions were animated by different studios or had considerably more money. If I were to pick some episodes that were worth checking out, I'd say the Origin ones are all good, but then the X-Men crossover is pretty cool, and I really wore out the VHS tape I had of it as a kid. It's not the best Spidey series, but it's still got some merit. Spidey's the same hero we know and love, and it's not so bad having a few friends to tag along since they make sure the spotlight stays on him. It's clear this show did resonate with some people though, because it's always being referenced in one form or another in the comics, and Firestar managed to carry over to the books eventually. It's still got that same Spider-Man charm, just with backup this time.
I'm ready to chuck it all and give up being Spider-Man.
Peter?
No way, buddy boy. What happened to that great lesson you learned?
Yes, with great power.
Comes great responsibility?
Okay, I'm gonna do the next one. If that takes a couple months, please don't be angry at me. It'll be soon. It won't take 7 months, probably, but like, just be patient, okay? Be patient. I got stuff to do. Be patient.